Chapter 25, Life Begins. Jerahab once again stepped to his right within the great unknown. The sphere followed along the seared path and was beginning its fifth rotation. A low hum filled the air as Jerahab softly pushed out a melody. He poked his ring finger into the cosmos directly over Nikal, then twisted it around. "You will seek to destroy my people," Jerahab said directly to Nikal. Nikal shook when he first heard Jerahab's voice, then calmed himself. "Your people? What are people?" In response, Jerahab plucked his finger upward. A ghostly image rose from Nikal's being, attaching itself to Jerahab's ring. He grabbed the scroll and securely pressed his signet ring onto the parchment, forming the fifth seal. The humming then turned into a beautiful song. As the words left his mouth, they drifted into the Elinthial Hall. The words met Kohengal as he pulled up the portion of the cosmos that was under the northern sector. Reaching over to the shelf, he grabbed the fifth vial and plunged it into the Ysoavel surrounding Nikal. The vial drank in an abundance of darkness while sweeping over the outer edge. Once the vial was filled, Kohengal placed it alongside the fourth vial. Kohengal returned the image to the table just as he bellowed out a joyful song. His words mingled with Jerahab's song as it soared past Elinthial and toward afar. Shatar carefully kept his eyes on the northern portion of the cosmos. The sonic boom broke the unusual stillness where Nikal had been standing. "Finally, his hand," Shatar let out as he recognized Jerahab's presence interacting with Nikal. "Please take him out now," Shatar prayed. Then, in the corner of his eye, a bottle of some sort whisked through the air. The others were now watching the clear vial fill with darkness as it sprung past Nikal. "Nigad, are you sure you do not have any more information for us?" asked Uriel. Before there could be any more discussion, a distant sound shot from the eastern gate. Nikemabed had returned to afar. He held out his hand as another trumpet appeared. This golden trumpet resembled a key. As Nikemabed pulled the mouthpiece close, the center of afar quaked. The reopened fissure filled with smoke then billowed just above the mouth of the fissure and formed an image. Within moments, a portal emerged. Nikemabed gave a steady blow into the trumpet. A ribbon of color moved from its bell into the portal. When the tip of the ribbon entered the portal's mouth, Nikemabed inhaled. The ribbon re-emerged with a bronze key fastened to its end. It whipped back into the trumpet and secured the key within. The refreshing melody vibrated from Nikemabed's heart as the fifth trumpet disappeared. The words from Jerahab and Kohengal soared through the waves. Nikemabed prepared his words to join theirs. The children were intrigued by Or's song. Some of them sat with gaping mouths while others swayed to the melody. The theater screen focused on Nikemabed as he transformed into his spirit form. Taking flight, he greeted Jerahab and Kohengal's song as it soared through the waves. In a blast of harmony, the words that the three sang reverberated into the sky. The scene on the screen pulled back, displaying the landscape of afar. Vast forests and a raging river came into view as Nikemabed traveled through the sky carrying their song. The children watched a trail of heat momentarily warp the sky behind him. Then the sky elongated. The image of the musical stanza appeared adorned with an array of musical notes dotting its lines. Nikemabed continued to sail through the sky, leaving the song lingering behind in his path. The longer the song grew, the more changes the children saw. By now, the musical stanza had lengthened and converted into a series of foreign words floating behind semi-transparent notes. "Are those words to their song?" Mia asked. All eyes in the theater had been fixed on the newly emerging images, but were now on Rashan in anticipation for his answer. Rashan knew this was not the time to interrupt his reading, therefore he simply pointed to the screen to redirect their attention. The words of the song hung in the air as it continued. With each new word, the letters became increasingly pronounced until they broke into small, colorful flares of brilliant light. The children squinted, trying to make out what the flares were, or better yet, what they had become. "I bet those are new angelics," Megan whispered to Sarah. "Why would Or be creating new angelics? To replace the bad ones that are imprisoned in Sheol?" Sarah was not convinced by Megan's theory. Before she could comment again, a voice behind her interjected, "Just watch and see what happens." The sky of afar was quickly filled with the colorful flares of light dashing away in every direction. Or's beautiful song still rang through the universe while another tune softly chimed in. It was a faint sound at first, but intensified as the number of lights increased. The screen split and a small portion of the theater followed the movement of 2 pink lights. "Megan, look! Those aren't new angelics. Those are birds!" Sarah shouted with excitement. Her comment drew the others' attention to the smaller screen. "You're right, Sarah. And those look like flamingos," declared Morris. As they watched the sky fill with birds, the theater filled with the chirps, squawks, whistles, and songs of thousands of birds. The larger screen continued to show Nekemabed in flight with the stream of heat, music, and words flowing behind him. Then he dove down toward one of the rivers. The illusion of being immersed into the river transformed the theater. Shadows of rippling waves danced off the screen as the musical trail of words hovered in the air above the children. Then the most incredible thing happened. The words began to glow. Unexpectedly, they burst into shapes of colorless fish. The fish jumped out of the air and back into the theater screen. Once the fish splashed into the water, they electrified with vivid colors that the children could not describe. "Or just created those fish in the theater!" exclaimed Rachel. Rashawn was reading at a faster pace due to the excitement of the events unfolding within the theater. He felt the spray of water as the fish returned to their watery home. "Remember, this has already happened. Or is allowing us to experience his creation firsthand." Rashawn snuck the comment out when he reached the chapter break. In the next chapter, the children watched the trail of letters torpedo toward the open sea, leaving behind splashes of color that quickly swam away. Nekemabed entered the sea at full speed, while the crescendo of their song released an innumerable amount of notes that then burst into new life. Nekemabed dove deeper into the sea as he let out the last words of their song. The last letters lingered on the screen and then burst into a pair of cobalt blue eels that whipped into motion. The children watched Nekemabed reach the sea floor. He stomped his foot on the bottom of the sea next to a set of previously established iron bars. The bars rattled from the force, and small elements of earth rose around him. Each element held an important code but lacked key information it needed to develop into life. Nekemabed spoke. As his words departed from his mouth, the element granules divided into groups, unlocking the needed information and culminating into solid forms. This process was repeated several times. "Are those becoming sea creatures?" probed Simon. He concentrated on the largest of the solid forms. "That one looks like a mushroom to me," Miklehi snickered as he watched a giant squid develop. The children were fascinated with the underwater scene. Suddenly, the creatures dispersed and Nekemabed called up a familiar image. Nekemabed waited until each of the sea creatures and their partners were fully developed before introducing the beast of the sea. As the area cleared, he reached down and tapped a rhythmic code onto the seafloor. The rhythm burrowed through the mantle and finally arrived where Nekau's ghostly image had last been seen. A sonic wave moved around the image and encapsulated it, then pulled it back through the mantle and presented it to Nekemabed. He immediately sprinkled a handful of earthen elements over the image. The sea monster image then became a living creature. "You are here for a purpose," Nekemabed told it. "We took you from Nekau so that you will be a reminder of what pride looks like. Your hardened heart reflects your iron-like scales. These are your coverings that you put your trust in, just as Nekau did. Leviathan will be your name. You will be hunted, but none will capture you. The one whom you represent will lead those whose hearts have hardened." At the end of Nekemebed's declaration, the sky and the sea were filled with movement of life. All was in order for the next step to be taken. Jerahab anticipated his next move. He eagerly stepped to his right to signal the completion of his work and the beginning of a new day. With his step, Adam shook and the remaining rocks of Rahab rattled. Jerahab waved his hand around the sphere twice, then stopped near the scroll. Instantly, a cloud of red dust mixed with rocks from Rahab shot out of the sphere and crashed onto the parchment. He quickly pressed his ring into the smudge on the scroll, solidifying the sixth seal. Kohengal held 4 sets of chains in one hand and an empty vial in the other. He called to Nekemebed through the table, "Your trumpet is prepared, and I have the chains. Look now and fill my vial." Kohengal moved his vial into position, and Nekemebed's image appeared. Nekemebed opened his mouth, releasing a stream of fire that flowed into the vial. Suddenly, Nekemebed was standing between 2 great rivers. He called back to Kohengal, "The chains, please." As Kohengal handed him the chains, Nekemebed thrust them into one of the rivers. The chains fell to the bottom and fused to the iron bars under the deep water. The loud clang of the chains signaled the closing of the vial and the return of the golden trumpet to its place. The image of Nekemebed was gone. "One last thing," Kohengal whispered. He then pulled up the image of the sacred orchard. The orchard was fully arrayed with every tree and plant ever created. "I cannot hide the truth. Rebellion has raised its head, and it must be remembered." With this thought, the tree of knowledge appeared in the midst of the orchard. The observers in Elenthial continued watching the events unfold within the cosmos. Far below, they saw a burst of red break through the outer band of rocks and into the western region of the Rakia. Upon its entry, the members of the Story of the Sky moved into action. The shepherd swung his staff, catching the red swirling tornado. He guided it over to the starry river. As the swirl of red followed the starry path, it approached the Elenthial audience. Thousands of rocks from Rahab's remains knocked together, creating a terrible thunderous noise. All the spectators in the western gate braced themselves for impact. The tornado tore toward them. With anticipation, they shielded their faces. Instantly, the whirlwind disappeared at the gate's threshold as the sound of clanging chains echoed through the universe. "What was that?" cried Shatar as they lowered their arms. "I don't know," Uriel responded, "but you are covered in something." He walked over to examine the mysterious substance. Nagad noticed that everyone around him was covered with the same thing. He quickly examined his arm and recognized the origin of the dust. Confidently, he announced, "This dust is from a dam." "A dam? Why would Jerahab bring the dust of a dam and the rocks of Rahab into the great unknown?" Shatar questioned. Jerahab stood with a smile on his face, and the universal sphere glowed a tad brighter. With his hands now wrapped tightly around the sphere, codes of information flowed from his palms and penetrated the sphere's surface. Each code rushed to the eastern side, entered Salem's sky, and fed directly into the Elenthial hall. Codes of numbers fell onto the table of happenings as Kohengal added his codes of letters. The 2 codes twisted together above the table, making a spiral design. The image of afar became brighter as the universal sphere had before Jerahab released his codes. With a pulsating light, Kohengal pushed the code's spiral design through the waves and into Afar's surface. The surface of Afar swelled up as the codes were pushed deeper into the crust. Nekemebed watched the ground reach a prescribed point before he pressed himself downward. The closer he moved to the earth, the faster he twisted counterclockwise, which stirred the elements into a spiral design. Nekemebed had the pleasure of whispering to them and watching them form into living animals. The pattern was repeated 3 times to create all of the insects and animals. After Nekemebed watched the last of the animals roam off into the distance, he proceeded to the area of the 7 mountains Then he called forth a sequence of amino acids from the mountains, a mixture of proteins from the river, and a series of elements from the valleys. Amino acids, energize! The acids immediately clung together. Proteins, carry your water to the amino acids. Once the proteins covered the amino acid structure, unique three-dimensional shapes elongated, forming the outline of a skeleton. Elements converge. Major elements bombarded the skeletal shape. Flesh and hair instantly covered the bare bones. There stood the shell of a man, perfectly carved out, yet lifeless. The screen in the theater suddenly split into 3 equal parts as it had before. On one screen, Nekemebed walked up the center mountain, then disappeared. Another screen showed Kohengal watching Nekemebed ascend the mountain through the table of happenings. Kohengal then disappeared from the Elenthial hall. The last screen revealed the universal sphere freely floating down the seared path, unoccupied by Jerahab. He no longer stood within the great unknown. "Where did they all go?" Alyssa asked. "I bet they are all on afar," responded Simon, "and going to do something with that man." Or, Rashawn's voice filled the theater as the screen merged back into one picture. The children realized they were now in Salem looking at the great temple. Or was back in his full form as the 3 joined together. He walked toward the entrance of the temple with the massive train of his robe following behind him. The robe's appearance had changed since the last time the children had seen it. It was no longer a pearl white, sheer silk as when the realm of the regions was in place. Now it moved as if it made a thick velvet material dyed in scarlet reds and deep purples. The hem was a wide band decorated with Or's symbol. "His robe is so different and even more beautiful," Rachel announced. As she spoke, they watched Or enter the temple. The theater rattled as Or passed through the temple's 2 enormous porch columns. The smell of incense from the temple's court drifted into the theater as the children watched Or sit upon his throne. The seraphim and cherubim sang out his praises. From beside his throne, Or pulled out the book of names that the children had seen him tuck away earlier during the story. He held it and quickly thumbed through its pages. The children were fascinated by the animation of his face as he read some of the names. Or let out a soft sigh, tucked the book away again, and the form of the lifeless man materialized before him. Or looked at the lifeless creation before him and grinned. He rose from his throne and approached the shell of a man. With a forceful breath he blew into the man's face. Then Or placed his hand upon the man's head. Or's breath swirled around the man before gathering above him. It formed 3 circles, all linked in the center. In a rhythmic motion, much like a heartbeat, the 3 circles moved together until they were perfectly aligned. Once aligned, a puff of mist mixed in the breath as it entered the man's nostrils and mouth. The man's chest rose and lowered as he drew in the air around him. His eyes blinked open and he called out, "Or!" then proceeded to fall to his knees. Nagad had finished getting the last of the dust off of him when he spotted one of his men moving quickly toward them. "This may be what we have been waiting for. I hope he carries word from Salem," Shatar groaned. "Nagad, we have just received word that Or has returned to his temple," the Mallet began his report. "Do we know what Or is doing in the temple? Is he calling for us?" Nagad asked. "No, we are not sure what Or is doing. He has not called for anyone as of yet. However, the sky of Salem is filled with colorful lights that radiated from the temple and seem to suggest that something spectacular is on the horizon. I believe it is time for me to return to Salem," Uriel announced. He turned and left with great speed. Or leaned down and gently touched the man on his shoulder. "You are made in my image. Stand." The man stood and looked at his surroundings. He took in the beauty of the temple. His eyes sparkled as thoughts zoomed through his mind. "I have given you language to speak and wisdom to share in my existence. I have created a kingdom for you to reign over. Your temple is magnificent." "Yes, as is your kingdom. Come, let me show you." Or led the way to the Elenthial hall. The Elenthial sky was a welcome sight for the man. While Or had created within him the understanding of what he was seeing, every step the man took changed his understanding into experience. "Is this my kingdom that you spoke of?" he asked as he admired the stunning scenery. Or slightly chuckled at the innocence of the inquiry and gave the man a pat on the back as they walked up the steps of the Elenthial hall. "Your kingdom is a shadow of this one. It had a beginning and will come to an end, whereas mine is eternal." He led the man before the table of happenings. "Here is your kingdom," he said while pulling up the image of afar. The stone of fire rotated, and colors of green, brown, and blue filled the room. As the man watched, Or drew the image closer until the landscape was clear. The man looked at the scenery with awe. Then a set of animals ran past. "What are those?" he asked. "Those I have created for you." "What are they called?" "I have given you dominion over all you see and the ability to give the animals their names." "Ox," the man said as his eyes followed the graceful movements of the animals. "They are ox, just as you call them." The table of happenings then filled with an assortment of animals slowly passing by. "And these?" "Yes, and these. They all wait to hear their names from you, for you are the head of them all." Nikal had grown impatient. He was tired of Or's games and had been sickened by the song that proceeded through the cosmos. It was yet another reminder to Nikal of his restraints. Suddenly, a brilliant light caught his eye. He turned his attention to the eastern gate. "What is going on in Salem?" he thought. The last of the animals marched past. The man stared into the floating image of afar. "Are there any more to name?" "No, you have seen them all. It is now time for you to enter your kingdom. The sacred orchard will be your palace. I have put within it our heart's desire and all truth." Or waved his hand over the table of happenings so each of the hovering images sunk back into its surface. Then the room stood empty. Nikal moved toward the shaft of light with great speed. The brightness did not bother him as it had in the past, for he remained engulfed in the Isoavel, which was guarding him from the light's effect. He continued to approach the light until he suddenly hit a clear, solid wall. The Isoavel butted up against the shaft of light connecting Elenthial with afar, creating an impassable wall. Nikal was refused entry. He was shocked when he hit the wall. He looked around. At the threshold of the eastern gate, he saw Or standing with someone. "What is that?" "It is not a Malik or any other angelic I have seen." Nikal decided to call out to Or. "Are you afraid of something? Is that why you have this wall up?" Or looked out into the darkened cosmos and glanced at Nikal. He heard his questions but refused to entertain them. Instead, he turned to the man and spoke. "Look closely into the light. Do you see my glory? It will be your glory as well. You are made in my image. You will rule afar and reign over my angelics. You are Pelos." "Pelos? What has he created to rule over afar? I am its ruler. It is my kingdom." Knowing Nikal's thoughts, Or repeated, "Pelos will rule afar." Then, with a flash of light, Or and Pelos stopped directly in front of Nikal before disappearing. Nikal was able to get a closer look at Pelos. He looks as if he is of Or. They share the same internal light and covering. His likeness is uncanny, but is his authority. The sacred orchard welcomed Or and Pelos' arrival. The two of them walked through the orchard as they talked. "This is your palace. As you can see, it is arranged in the likeness of the great temple," Or announced. Pelos began investigating his surroundings as Or continued to speak. "I have placed you here to tend to your kingdom and those who are in it. You will rule from here, but you must also guard that which is sacred." "Guard what? And from whom?" Or guided Pelos to the eastern side of the orchard. There stood the infamous tree of knowledge. This tree represents rebellion. Within it is all that we abhor. There is one whose light does not shine from within. He is the deceiver, and he will seek out this tree. You must guard it from him and never eat of its fruit. If you do, you will become like him." The land appears so much larger than it did in the Olympial Hall. How am I to tend to afar alone while guarding this tree? Pelos thought. Or smiled, knowing Pelos's thoughts. "You will not be here alone. Will you be here as well? I will come and walk with you both daily." "Both? But I am one." "No, you are not one. Within you lies another." Or placed his index finger on Pelos's forehead, and the man slowly collapsed to the ground. "This is my favorite part. I have always wanted to see this part of the story," exclaimed Mia. Micklehee slightly rolled his eyes before he looked in her direction. "That's about right. This would be your favorite part." His comment solicited a playful swat from his sister. Rashawn glanced up and saw the screen burst with a brilliant light as Or created woman. He quickly noted for the children, "Remember, from Or came man, and from man came woman." They work in perfect harmony at this moment, but that will soon change. With that statement, he returned to the book. On the west side of the sacred orchard, the blossoms from the eternal tree released a sweet fragrance as an announcement of new life. Pelos was awakened when the sweet aroma danced beneath his nose. Opening his eyes, he immediately sat up and looked to his side. There sat another like him, wrapped in perfect light, reflecting Or's very nature. Understanding where she had come from, he was overwhelmed by her presence. "We are to be as one. I have left my Creator's house and joined with you because you are from me. Together we will represent Or in this kingdom." Or reached for both of their hands. He tenderly pulled them to their feet and addressed them both. "Pelos, you are correct that you are one, and together you will represent me here in this kingdom. I task you with populating the stone of fire as well as caring for it. I give you dominion over the seas, air, and land. Let us walk in the coolness of this day, for soon all will be set in order."